The European Council has said that Prime Minister Mark Carney is getting on a plane to go to Armenia. He reaches Yerevan on May 2nd, and on May 4th he will not be standing outside the building. He will not be looking through glass. He will be sitting at the table of the European political community. This is the group that brings together nearly 50 heads of state and government from across the continent. It is the meeting that was created as a strictly European talk for the first time since the European political community started after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. A leader from outside Europe has been brought into that room. That leader stands for Canada. Think about that for a moment. Not the United Kingdom, which was already part of Europe's heart before it even left. Not Norway, not Switzerland, not Iceland. Those countries sit right next to Europe's land area. They are close to the buildings and systems. Canada is not close to anything European. Canada sits on the far side of the Atlantic Ocean. It is a North American country in every way, in its land, its tradeways, its government history. And yet, next week in the Armenian capital, Carney will walk through a door that has never been opened for any non-European leader in the history of this group. What Europe has just done, without any fancy diplomatic words, is draw its own edges again to include Ottawa. European Council President Antonio Costa made the announcement through his account on X on Tuesday. His words were clearly warm. He described Europe and Canada as more than just partners who think alike. He went further, calling their relationship what he called a global alliance built around peace, shared good times, and working together across countries. Pay close attention to that phrase. Antonio Costa is not known for using loose words. The European Council presidency does not post on social media without every word being checked, cleared, and approved through many layers of official groups. When the second highest political office in the European Union publicly describes Canada as part of a global alliance, you are not looking at just polite talk. You are looking at a strong position being said out loud. Here is the history that makes this moment so important. The European political community was Macron's idea. The French president suggested it in 2022 exactly because Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine had shown the limits of slower treaty-based groups. The idea was to build a quick meeting place, a spot where European democracies could line up on the urgent matters, security dangers, energy needs, mixed threats, and strong democracy, without waiting for slow official agreement to catch up. The setup was European by plan. The meetings moved from Prague to Granada to London to Budapest to Copenhagen. Every time the rule stayed the same. European leaders, European plans, European land. That rule no longer stays the same. So why Canada? Why now? Why Yerevan? Start with the clearest pressure. Canada is going through the most upsetting trade relationship with Washington in a generation. Taxes have been put on Canadian aluminum, steel, cars, wood, and dairy under the Trump administration. The closely joined North American supply chains that 3 decades of talks created are being pulled apart right now, and Ottawa has been moving with real speed to find partners that can take some of what Washington is taking away. Europe has been watching. Carney himself set the feeling in Brussels in June of last year at the 20th Canada-EU Summit, where Canada and the EU started what they called the new EU-Canada Strategic Partnership of the Future. This was a plan covering digital change, artificial intelligence, cyber safety, and digital systems. At that same summit, Canada and the EU signed a security and defense partnership. This was a formal political setup that put existing security work into one structure. That was June. By December, Canada had finished talks to join the EU's Security Action for Europe program, known as SAFE. And by February of this year at the Munich Security Conference, Canada officially signed in. Canada became the only non-European country in the world with special access to this tool. SAFE brings together up to $244 billion Canadian dollars in loans to EU member states for buying military equipment together, ammunition, drones, missiles, and artillery systems. Canadian defense companies can now offer to work on those projects. Canadian buying can now be paid for together through European ways. Canada is inside the European Defense Industry Group. That is the base under Carney's chair in Yerevan. He is not arriving as a guest who looks at the building from a polite distance. He is arriving as a partner who already has a seat with the people building it. In Davos this past January, Carney gave a speech at the World Economic Forum that should have been noticed more than it was in American foreign policy groups. The main point was clear. He described what he called a break in the existing global order. He said middle powers needed to act, not wait, not push, not ask. They needed to build new ways of working together while the chance was open. The way he said it was on purpose. Stop depending on Washington as the main support. Start treating group action by middle powers as the building itself. Europe was in the audience. Europe agreed, and then Europe sent an invitation. Now let me walk you through the part of this story that most reports are not staying on long enough. The place is not by chance. Yerevan is the capital of Armenia, a country of fewer than 3 million people squeezed between Russia, Iran, Turkey, and the outer edge of the European Union. For most of the time after the Soviet Union, Armenia was treated as Moscow's close area, depending on the military through the Collective Security Treaty Organization, tied to Russia through the Eurasian Economic Union, and holding a Russian military base on its land. That time is falling apart. Azerbaijan's taking back of Nagorno-Karabakh in September 2023 changed everything. Russia, Armenia's chosen security protector, stood by and did nothing as over 121,000 Karabakh Armenians left the area. Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan has not forgiven this, and the Armenian people have not either. Armenia stopped its membership in the Russian-led Collective Security Treaty Organization in 2024. In March 2025, the Armenian parliament passed an EU joining law, officially setting the country's plan to start the process of joining the European Union. In December 2025, Armenia and the EU started a new strategic plan. Talks to make visas easier are now happening. The EU has put a civilian watching team along the Armenian-Azerbaijani border, and on April 21st of this year, the EU Council agreed to set up a new EU partnership mission in Armenia, aimed at making the country's strength better against foreign false information, cyber attacks, and illegal money movements. On May 5th, the day after the European Political Community Summit ends, the European Union will hold its first ever one-on-one summit with Armenia on Armenian land. President Macron is traveling to Yerevan for a state visit. This is not a single event, this is a series of steps. When Carney lands in Yerevan, he is stepping into the middle of a continent that is actively drawing its own eastern edge again, taking in a country that Russia thought was its own, and stretching the political and security setup of the European project farther than it has ever gone before. And he is there as an invited person taking part, not just an observer. The official plan for the summit has the idea of building the future togetherness and strength in Europe. The working subjects are strong democracy, connections, economic safety, and energy safety. Every single one of those subjects is something Canada has spent decades building knowledge in. Every single one is something where Canadian and European interests now go in the same direction. Here is my understanding of what is actually being built here. Costa's invitation is not a one-time diplomatic act. It is the start of a new group. Europe is not going to offer Canada EU membership. Carney himself said no to that clearly in public comments reported by CBC. The legal setup would not allow it, and neither would the political facts. But Europe is quietly making something that sits between observer and full insider, a level of partnership that has never been made before. And Canada is the first country put into it. Think about what that example means in real ways. If Canada can sit at the European political community table once, the way to do it again already exists. The next time Europe and Canada need to line up answers to taxes or agree on Arctic safety or talk about a link between the Canada-EU trade agreement known as CETA and the Indo-Pacific plans Canada has been making, The setup for doing that at the highest political level is already there. The chairs have been moved, the rules have been written. There is also a message inside this that neither side is saying straight out. The post-1945 Western setup was built on a specific idea. Every road ran through Washington. NATO work ran through Washington. G7 agreement ran through Washington. Trade rules, security setup, groups across countries, all of it worked on the idea that the United States was the main support. The Trump administration has spent more than a year showing that this support can be taken away at any moment. Europe has now publicly welcomed Canada, historically among the most loyal of Washington's transatlantic friends, as a partner inside the European group. That is not a small diplomatic note. That is a basic message about where the setup of Western cooperation is going. One honest point to finish on. Invitations are not policy. Summits are not treaties. Carney still has important work ahead. CETA, the Canada-EU trade agreement that started working in 2017, still has not been approved by 10 EU member states, including Belgium, Bulgaria, Cyprus, France, Greece, Hungary, Ireland, Italy, Poland, and Slovenia. Full approval matters for the investment protection parts that Canadian businesses are counting on. Canada's defense spending still has to keep going up to reach the new NATO level. The space between talk and strong buildings is never short, and plenty of governments have covered the first mile and stopped on the rest. But for this week in May, in a city that is itself in the process of rewriting what it means to belong to Europe, the Canadian Prime Minister will sit at a table where no non-European has ever sat. A former central bank governor, who almost nobody outside London and Ottawa knew by name 18 months ago, will take his place among 47 other leaders of the most important political group on the continent. And the Western alliance that comes out on the other side of that summit will look different than the one that existed before Carney walked through that door. Not dramatically different, not overnight different, but different in ways that will grow over years and that will read very clearly when looking back. History is moving. Carney lands in Yerevan on May 2nd, the summit begins May 4th, and the European political community from this point forward is something it was not the week before.